Hi, everybody. My name is Richard Tromans. I'm the founder and editor of Artificial Lawyer, and welcome this morning to the Legatics webinar about burnout and stress in the legal profession. The webinar is based on a set of research which Legatics conducted with YouGov, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. We're going to look at some of the key results with Anthony Seale, who is the CEO of Legatics. We're then going to have a discussion with the panel who we will introduce after the data has been presented, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to have some Q&A with you as well, the audience. So as you're going along and listening, if you have a question, put it to one side and please bring it up towards the end, and hopefully we can direct some of our attention to your questions. But looks like people are now starting to enter. Fantastic. But let's press on because we only have about an hour. So Anthony, over to you. If you'd like to give a basic introduction to where we got the data from and then some of the results.
Thank you so much. So YouGov is an international organization that conducts large-scale surveys. We invited them to conduct this work because we thought they'd bring some real rigor to the process. So I think we're all very aware from anecdotal experience and my own experience and a number of people in the team's experience that burnout, stress exists within the legal profession. But we were really, really interested to actually go and measure this and try and put some numbers on it. And I think YouGov conducting that survey really allowed us to bring some rigor to things like sampling and the research. So I'll run through a few of the results from the survey. You can download a full copy of it from our website. Perhaps we go on to the next slide. But these are just a few of the findings that really, really stood out to me. The first one was just the scale of the issue. So over 9 in 10 lawyers experience stress or burnout at some point in their profession, but more than a quarter were experiencing it on a daily basis, and around half were experiencing it on a weekly basis as well. For those that felt they couldn't continue in the profession, work-life balance was cited to be the biggest factor contributing to them leaving. And almost 2/3 of lawyers felt that their job had a negative impact on both their physical and mental health, and the biggest impact they felt was on their mental health. I think what firms are doing to support lawyers in this area really varies. Some firms are doing a lot more than others, but less than a quarter of lawyers did feel supported by their firm when they were experiencing stress or burnout. Finally, automating administrative work was considered by lawyers to be the most impactful way that technology could assist with changing the nature of the job and reducing stress and burnout. I think there was one more, there's plenty more in the survey if you download a copy of it, but there was one more thing that stood out to me as well, which was about the reason why people went into the profession, which was also asked. And the greatest reason that people went into the profession was to make a difference to people's lives. And that was something that I thought was really important. And I set that in my own mind off against the stress of the job as well. So I'm really looking forward to some discussion. I'll pass over to Richard, who will host the discussion.
Thanks, Anthony. Thank you. I mean, first of all, let's just make some sort of extra observations. 9 out of 10 lawyers, that's extraordinary. So we're talking like 90% of the profession is experiencing some kind of negative, I guess we can call it a mental health issue because of work. That's really extraordinary. And let's introduce the panel now. So I will be chairing. We have Anthony, who you just heard from, who is the CEO. And we also have Lucy Shurwood. Actually, Lucy, would you like to introduce yourself and just maybe tell the audience a little bit about some of the work you do in this area?
Yep, sure. So I'm Lucy Shurwood. I'm a partner at Pinsent Masons. I am a finance lawyer by background, but I now specialize in innovation and technology in service delivery for clients. So I'm not really a sort of transactional lawyer anymore, but very much still a practicing lawyer. And I have a particular interest in this area because at Pinsent Masons, we were a founder member of the Mindful Business Charter, which is a charter that now has many, many signatories across law, financial services, and even more broadly. And it sets out some principles that we think, and we have now some evidence to prove it, will help to improve well-being and reduce stress at work.
Fantastic. And next is Ryan, who also works at Legatics.
Thank you very much. So I used to be a corporate lawyer. I was an M&A lawyer for 6.5 years. So I've been through all the trials and tribulations of what it's like to do the job, and used to use a lot of technology in the job, which I found helped enormously, and got to the point I liked using the technology so much that I thought I would switch to the other side and start building it.
Fantastic. And also it's worth mentioning that Anthony as well, you also used to be a commercial lawyer. Where were you before, Anthony?
I was a project finance lawyer at Clifford Chance previously.
Gotcha. And Chrissie is in the process of joining us. I believe the Legatics team, if they're listening in the background, will be adding her on. She is at the webinar. I just don't think she's been added as a panelist. Oh, here she is. Fantastic. Hi, Chrissie.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, I had some technical issues joining, but got here just in the nick of time. Yes, so I'm Chrissie Wolfe, former solicitor at Irwin Mitchell, recently turned freelance consultant, also the founder of Law and Broader, which is a social media-based enterprise to facilitate accessibility for future lawyers seeking to enter the profession.
Fantastic and excellent timing. Excellent timing. So let's get into some of the key issues. Let's start off with the basic one. So the key finding was that 90% of the sample of lawyers, and obviously it's not universal, but it was only a sample, but still indicative, 90% of them were experiencing some type of stress and some type of burnout at some point in their careers. Let's start off with Anthony, because you used to be a lawyer, you've left. Does that resonate with you? Would you say that kind of strikes your own experience as a real piece of data? Is it that bad?
I certainly saw a certain amount of that around me, and was very aware of it. I think for me, I always felt that there was this equation running in my head, which was I was willing to put up with a lesser work-life balance and perhaps more stress in the role, where I felt much more connected with the purpose, and perhaps the purpose why I sort of originally went into law, which for me was about really understanding the commercial motives of transactions, and connecting with the kind of core of the legal transactions that I was doing and the reasons they were happening in the world. And I think what I felt is, particularly as a junior lawyer, the amount of kind of administrative work and the nature of tasks and how many steps away I was from the clients and their reasoning for doing the work, that the harder I found it to manage with a kind of lesser work-life balance. And I think as I felt sort of a little bit further and further away from that purpose, I started to question what I was doing, how the work was conducted, and actually started to find a new purpose for myself, which was solving the problem, and went away and started Legatics, which is probably not the same route that a lot of people take, but I essentially found a new purpose trying to solve the problem using technology.
Absolutely. But I mean, would you say, obviously in your case, you sort of took a sort of positive way out of it, but I mean, were you were slightly disillusioned perhaps on a philosophical level with your purpose, but was that leading to stress and burnout in yourself?
There were certainly times when I was stressed, and I think taking that positive step and providing that route for me provided a route probably before that stress reached a burnout point to find a new purpose and to find a way out. But I think I think there are a number of people around me who, and this was something I was scared of, was getting stuck, not getting connected with a purpose that I really felt, or not getting close enough to the one that I really originally wanted to get close to. And I think I did see some people and spoke to some people who felt a little bit kind of stuck in what they were doing. And I think then when the job also gets very stressful, that's when that stress really starts to lead to burnout, when somebody feels they haven't got control over the situation, haven't got a positive way forwards.
Gotcha. Yeah, and we'll come back to the point about agency as an individual in the legal profession very shortly. Let's go to Chrissie, because you also left, and then Lucy, because Lucy, you're still very much part of the major law firm. But Chrissie, you also left fairly recently. Why did you leave, and what were the stress related issues and so forth?
Yeah, I can resonate a lot with what Anthony just said there, actually. A lot of similar things applied to me. I mean, I think probably one of the reasons why that stat is so high is there's perhaps a misconception that burnout is always associated with sheer volume of work and hours worked, which might lead you to assume that it would only be felt by the people working in the biggest firms working 100-hour weeks. But I think equally, to Anthony, I resonate with the fact that it was actually the sort of the nature of the work at times which became quite repetitive. Often the technology was letting us down, very admin based. And actually I was kind of moving further and further away from what I actually perceived to be kind of the nature of the job that I signed up for. And actually it was becoming more and more administrative, more and more tedious. And I actually sort of got to a point where I thought this is not really what I signed up to do. And I think particularly the pandemic accelerated that when we had to kind of move into systems which just weren't adequate for dealing with that new situation and being fully online. And I just felt disconnected. And again, similarly, I'd sort of started my own business running alongside that, which was Law and Broader, where I'd found a purpose in that, which was different and separate from the purpose that I was finding in my work. And I sort of drifted further and further away from that to the point where I realized that it was no longer fulfilling me, really. And even at the start that it did, I found myself changing and drifting, and sort of as I sort of saw technology becoming more widely available in other places that wasn't available where I was, I was kind of aware of the way the market was moving, and I didn't find purpose in the particular role in the particular firm that I was working with anymore.
Interesting. So yeah, so again, it's like purpose, meaning leads to stress. It's interesting because one of the pieces of data, people were asked about what causes dissatisfaction, and actually very near the bottom of the list was doing mundane and sort of repetitive process work, which, so maybe it's like a personality thing. Maybe some people are not actually being stressed so much by the complexity of the work. Maybe it varies depending on who you are. I mean, if you think about some law firms, or let's say you work for a conveyancing business, you probably do the same work every single day, handling, real estate documents. But yeah, so just to clarify, I think there probably are different personalities here. But let's go to Lucy. You're there. You mentioned on a previous call that you had experienced some levels of stress in the past. What do you think about the results?
I mean, they're not a surprise, and it's sort of, there have been other studies that have illustrated exactly what this one does, which is one of the reasons why we established the Mindful Business Charter. This isn't a new phenomenon. I have to say, having been in practice for 20 years, it is a lot better, I think, than it used to be. But there is still obviously a way to go, and this survey bears that out. My own experience as a junior lawyer was very, very different, I hope, to the experience that juniors have now. I have seen people carried out of meetings because they passed out, having not had any sleep for 3 days. That certainly wouldn't happen in my firm now, and I suspect it doesn't happen in very many anymore. So we have made improvements, but there is obviously still a way to go. The agency point, the sort of mundane work point, is really interesting, because that surprised me in the survey results. I would have thought that, as Chrissie and Anthony have said, that sort of doing work that you don't feel is interesting and valuable, I would have expected was higher up the list. And I think that's something that is changing, again, certainly in my firm, where just force of circumstances, we don't certainly get paid anymore to have hordes of junior lawyers doing basic admin tasks. So we've automated a lot of that, or we use alternative resources. So I hope, again, that we're moving in the right direction on that, and junior lawyers now are doing more interesting work. The converse to that is obviously, if you are junior and you feel like you're being given something that's too complex for you, that in itself is incredibly stressful. So again, looking at how we can support, and technology plays a really big part in that, just by giving people access to the resources to support them in what they're doing. And that's one of the ways in which we use Legatics, because it sort of lines all of that up for you. So there's, I'm not surprised, but I do think we're making good progress.
Okay, and we'll come to the solutions very shortly. Ryan, just briefly, I mean, what was your experience? You also left a large law firm. What drove you to change your careers?
I think a big part of it was what Anthony touched on, was the process work. I found quite often I was doing the same thing over and over again, and the drive to change that thing or make it a bit more efficient or a bit different wasn't quite there. And the kind of expectation was just churn it out the way you've done it before. Don't rock the boat too much, keep things coming the way that they always have been done, which kind of made attempts to use different technologies or innovate on something, or even just get rid of something that doesn't have any purpose anymore, was really difficult. So it was the difficulty in kind of changing the legacy methods, I think, was what drove me to head off.
Gotcha. Well, let's get into some of the solutions. I think we've established there are problems around stress. This may be because you're bored, to put it very, very simply. I didn't sign up for this. There could be a volume issue, as Lucy alluded to, working for 3 days straight and being carried out of the office on a stretcher. There could be other issues. For example, another one Lucy mentioned, which is you actually might be given work that is too complex. You're not ready for this, and you get dumped with a job that you're just going, oh my God, how on earth do I do this? And perhaps you don't get the support there. So let's go through some of the issues around how we can solve this. So I will go back to Lucy, start straight away on this one. How does an associate who has a problem deal with it? Who should they talk to?
I think obviously their peer group, because I think that's a really important source of support. As a partner, I am always, and it's in the nature of my job, I'm always really pleased to see people finding solutions to things. So if there's a piece of work that you think could be done better, or you actually don't think we should be doing at all, as a partner, if somebody comes to me and says, look, I don't think we need to do it this way, or I don't think we need to do it at all, and here's how I think we can make this better, I'm delighted, because it's the best outcome for everybody. So I would really encourage people, and especially if you're in a firm that has innovation activity or a sort of ideas hub, anything like that, participate in that and do what you can to try and improve the situation. I do think people are generally pretty receptive to that sort of suggestion.
And Chrissie, I mean, when you were going through your decision process, you worked probably incredibly hard to become a lawyer. You went through the training contract. Your parents and everyone's very proud of you, and your friends are like, wow, you're a lawyer, that's amazing. And then you've done a couple of years, and you're like, oh my God, I can't keep doing this. And that must be quite a strange experience. And then who do you share it with? Do you go to the partner and say, I don't understand it, I'm really bored by this, I'm not sure I can stay any longer? Did you talk to them, or?
So I think I sort of went about this slightly differently. I mean, I think perhaps because I'm a scientist, a born scientist, initially that's what my undergrad was in, I kind of look at everything as a kind of, you've got to identify the cause first before you can identify the solution. And I think whilst it's sort of easy to look at these stats and talk about the profession and say the legal profession causes burnout, or my job causes burnout, or my boss causes burnout, that's actually, it's not an objective thing. Burnout, as we've talked about, it's different for everybody. And actually it's those things cause you to feel burnt out. So you need to identify what about it is causing you as a person to feel burnt out. And I almost kind of went through a process of sort of fixed and variable experiments where I tried to work out what things about my job were making me feel burnt out. And I noticed that when I was out of the office at trial, working 14, 15 hours a day, although I was tired, I actually wasn't burnt out. However, if I spent 8 or 9 hours in the office, much less time, I felt more burnt out. So I realized quite quickly it wasn't necessarily volume of hours, it was the nature of the work that I was doing. And then I sort of drilled down a little bit further into that and said, okay, sort of analyze my behavior and my mood on each day, and then mapped it back to what I'd been doing that day. And on days where I'd been doing a lot of admin, repetitive, sort of template process driven work, I felt a lot more burnt out than days where I was kind of on the phone, litigating, knees deep in the CPR, sort of doing what I deemed to be the kind of really interesting work that kind of drove me. So I think technology was a part of the problem as well, having processes, which I know we're going to get onto later, which, I was aware there were much better processes out there. And actually there was a lot of extra admin that I was doing that I didn't need to do. And actually sort of once I'd identified those triggers, I sort of went to my employer and said, look, I am feeling burnt out. This is why. I figured out these triggers, and actually it would help me if we could facilitate this happening. And, the answer was, we can't really do that at the moment. And that's ultimately why I left. But actually, I think in some ways, when you go through that process, there are actually some ways that you can resolve your own burnout without actually needing to go to employer. For example, you can structure your days or weeks differently if you know what your triggers are. Sometimes you've got that capacity to manage your own day, to kind of, rather than having 4 days in the office and 1 day out, or 4 days behind your desk, you can spread your day out. So you're kind of moving around a little bit more in the day, for example, and I'd feel a lot less burnt out if I did that. And other days, and other times you can't be responsible for changing your own timetable. You need help from your employer. But generally speaking, I think if you can try and identify the solutions before you go to your employer, that is a big help, because it's much easier than just going, I feel burnt out, I don't know what to do, because your employer doesn't know what to do either. It's completely subjective. So you might be given a day off, for example, if you feel burnt out, or a week off. But actually, if you haven't identified the triggers, all that happens is when you come back, the triggers are still there and you get into the same process. So that doesn't always help, just having some time off. So sometimes, I think it's helpful in this process to really identify what your own triggers are, and then you can seek long-term sustainable solutions to that.
Yeah, no, totally. Good point. And to the question, when you actually went to one of the partners, they basically said, I presume you said, like, can I do more interesting work? And they went kind of, get back in your box kind of thing. You're a junior associate. You're not doing interesting work yet.
It wasn't. Yeah, it was more the technology point, actually. They just weren't in a place to really change those processes enough.
This is the thing. There are many embedded systemic issues, but Ryan wanted to say something on this, and I was going to ask you guys anyway. Did you raise the fact with the partner, Ryan, that you were kind of not with it any longer?
I don't think I so much raised it. I think I went a little bit down my own path in how I wanted to approach things. I was at A&O, who were actually quite good in giving me a half-time, quarter-time role on legal technology. And I was sort of empowered to sort of go and explore what solutions we could use to go and help lawyers do the job in a more efficient and more more efficient way. And I think the thing I found the hardest about that was I could see what I found for me was made things more efficient, but getting that through to the lawyers, communicating it to them, getting them time to learn the system, to understand the system, that in itself was a whole new challenge, which I hadn't quite appreciated, because they're busy, they've got things that they're doing. Trying to learn a new system is time consuming. If you want to get out at 11 o'clock and you've got an extra hour of training, that means you're going out at 12. And so that extra hour of training becomes something that just keeps you there later. And so something which you have to spend some time now to extract dividends from later isn't something that gets prioritized. And so you kind of just end up with a sort of purgatory situation where the things that could help you don't have time to do, so you don't do them, so you don't get better at the things you do. And then nothing really changes in that respect. So I found that as part of that role quite hard to actually change, to get people to use the things that really did help them work quicker and more efficiently.
No, it makes sense. And Lucy, you can see both sides of this, and also you've got the focus on the tech as well.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Ryan that, and lawyers can often be their own worst enemies and don't really enjoy change. Most don't, I do. But the tech point is really interesting, because I see an awful lot of legal tech in my role across the spectrum. The most important thing is to make it as easy and as intuitive as possible. I would rather something has 50% less functionality, but a lawyer can pick it up in 5-10 minutes, than it has all the bells and whistles in the world on it, but I'm going to need to give them an hour's training session and then repeat that every week until they're used to it. I just think it's so important to focus on the really simple, straightforward stuff. And then there's a slow process of adoption where they're like, oh, okay, I did that. It wasn't too painful. Now I can do the next bit. Now I can do the next bit.
Let's do a sort of series of more sort of quick fire questions, and I'll open this to anybody who wants to take them. I think it's the point about agency, and we'll just touch on this briefly. If you're a junior associate, how much or even a trainee, how much agency do you have? I.e., how much ability do you actually have to control your day? There's a ton of work, it's waiting for you. Can you really say to a partner who's looking after you, or a senior associate who's looking after you, I don't really want to do this proofing? Do you mind if I sit on the negotiation call with the senior partner? It'd be much more fun. How much likelihood have you actually got to do that?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I think it really depends on the firm, actually. I had quite a lot of autonomy, even when I was quite junior, and I was quite senior by the time that I left. But again, I think it comes down to kind of you coming up with a solution that doesn't involve kind of the firm losing money or too much extra work. So I think if you can say, actually, I can structure my day like this and I will still hit my targets, I will still bring in the same revenue, and it doesn't actually disrupt, your kind of your workflow too much, then partners are generally more amenable. But again, it does depend on the firm, and sometimes you just have to deal with what you're given as a junior lawyer. But I think always having a solution really helps. I think people generally entertain that a little more than just, can I just do this more interesting work? Okay, we'll follow that through. How does that still align with your goals and your objectives and your targets, etc.? I think if you go through that process, it's better.
Let's put that to Lucy, because you are a serving partner in a large law firm. If a junior associate came up to you and said, I don't really like the stuff you're giving me, can I do something different? And here's why. As Chrissie said, they wouldn't just be flippant, they would provide a seriously argued reason why what they could do would be better. Would you listen, or would you just be like, come on, mate, you're kidding me?
I have to be careful here because I'm conscious that I'm being recorded and my team will watch this back and I'll get a flood of requests to do exactly what they want. I think any good partner will want to make sure that people have a good balance of work, and that they're doing things that they enjoy. So within reason, of course, I would be open to that. And it's one of the things that I try and do, is make sure everyone gets a balance of different experiences. I think we all have to acknowledge that there is boring, repetitive stuff and it still needs to get done. And I'm a partner and I still have to do my fair share of it. But that's something we should all be really focused on. Let's not just keep accepting that somebody somewhere is going to have to spend hours just sitting there paginating. Let's find a way of making paginating a job that nobody has to do. And I think that is definitely the way that we should be going.
I will come to tech very, very shortly. Okay, here's another quick fire one. The clients. Whenever there's a discussion about overworking, long hours, stress, and so forth, we tend to focus on the law firms. On the client side, obviously, in-house lawyers, they also experience stress, burnout, and all kinds of other things. But equally, they're also, to some degree, part of the system. As someone was telling me literally last week, the reason why they left their firm was because they had a particular client who just kept on dumping work on them every Friday afternoon. And it just drove them nuts. And I just do not want to work every weekend. And the client thought that was fine. And the client was like, well, I'm paying you loads of money. And if you don't like it, I'll send it to another firm. Now, obviously not all clients like that by any means, but to what extent are clients, whether willingly, deliberately, accidentally, part of this process?
I think it is a job where there are important client demands and there can be really good reasons why something needs to be done quickly. But I think sometimes lawyers are a little bit too scared to ask the question of a client, how urgent is this? Or if we get this to you by this date, would that be okay? And they jump towards thinking this needs to be done straight away and we need to impress the client with this, and they're really going to go to another firm if we don't deliver it by Tuesday. I am a client sometimes now of law firms, and sometimes if my day's full on Tuesday and Wednesday, I know I'm not going to be able to look at that until Thursday anyway. So I really don't mind the discussion, about when it can be delivered. And I think quite often law firms don't have that discussion. They just jump to assuming that I think they kind of leap into what they know and their kind of culture, which is that everybody jumps up and does things as quickly as possible. And I think it might impress clients, but I think a lot of clients have been lawyers. They're managing things themselves, and I think they also understand if you have a conversation. I think the things that also impress and retain clients aren't just doing the work really, really quickly. I think the relationship, the conversations you're having with the clients, the fact that they get to know you a little bit better and how you're balancing your work, and that you consider them really important and are providing a great service because you've taken the appropriate amount of time to do these things and balance them well. I think there are other ways of impressing the clients, and we shouldn't be too scared to ask that question.
Lucy, sorry to put you on the spot again, but have you or would you ever say to a client, being realistic, could we have another 24 hours? Or would you just be like, no, whatever the client wants, whatever?
No, and that's where Mindful Business Charter has been really helpful, because the more clients come on board with that, the easier that conversation is. So I had it during the last year when pandemic and everybody was working really hard, and it just enabled us to have a conversation with a client that said, look, if we are going to deliver this to your timescale, we are all going to have to work all weekend. Do you really need it? Because if you really need it, absolutely, we will do it. But actually, if this is being prepared for a meeting that isn't, well, we all knew was fairly likely not to happen, then, you know, can we do it Monday, Tuesday, and then deliver it later in the week? And I think it's really important to have those conversations with clients, because as Anthony says, it isn't just about speed. It does show value in the relationship. And I think it shows that we're human. You know, nobody wants to force people to cancel their weekends if it isn't necessary. And also, if you're one of the people who's had their weekend cancelled to deliver something that then goes in the bin or isn't looked at for 2 weeks, it's really depressing. And that then contributes to your feeling of massive dissatisfaction.
Absolutely. And of course, I mean, you know, in-house lawyers are lawyers, so you know they know exactly what happens inside a law firm. And I suppose it's like a chain. I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, you know, the CEO or the CFO says, "Look, we've got a deal." They call the in-house legal team. They say, "Do it now." The in-house legal team calls the law firm, says, "Do it now." Even the company itself might be responding to external pressures, like an investor or, you know, an activist hedge fund or something. And it's like this chain of pressure that kind of work like a fissure that works its way all the way through the system. But let's move on to a different aspect, which is tech. And obviously many listeners are probably interested in technology and innovation. Before we get into some of the solutions around there, I remember talking to someone at Clifford Chance a few months ago in New York, and I asked them the question, if tech saves time, does it really change anything? And they said, it's a good question, because the problem is initially you do get genuine time savings and people do go home earlier, but rather a bit like the Borg in Star Trek, eventually the firm adapts and it understands that this stuff is now getting commoditized. It then refills that time up for the associate. So if they were working, you know, if you save an hour, eventually that hour gets taken back again, because they don't expect you to leave before 7, 8 p.m., whatever. Just on that point, I mean, do you think, is it possible for tech genuinely to carve out time to the point where associates do, let's say from this day forward, go home earlier and make the same money and deliver the same results? Or will you just get given more work and it'll fill your time again?
I know how my managing partner would answer that question. The more lawyer hours that are freed up, the more work they can do, yeah, the more fees we generate. Short term, I think that's right. I think the CC guides are absolutely right. I think longer term, this is about a strategic shift in how legal services are delivered, and to just go on filling up lawyer time with every benefit that you get back from tech is long term not really a recipe for a profitable business. How long it's going to take us all to work that out and respond to it in a profession that famously is slow to change, I don't know.
Well, Anthony and Ryan, I mean, you were both deal lawyers, and now you work with deal teams, providing a technology that helps them to do their jobs. I mean, what positive impacts have you seen from providing what you provide? And maybe just very, we don't want to do a sales thing, but just like in 10 seconds, just explain very briefly what Legatics actually does. So if people don't know what it does, they can understand. Ryan, go for it.
I'll go for it. All right. I mean, very quickly, we make it easier for lawyers to manage transactions. Lots of documents, lots of things moving. We put that online, make it much more simple to close and manage your deal. I use it a lot actually on deals. I use it about 15, 16 times. And in terms of time saving, I think what it gave me more than anything else was a central source of truth where I could go to find all my information, whereas previously I never had that. And that freed me up more to focus on those problems that I didn't have as much time to focus on. So it doesn't so much necessarily always give me time back, but it gave me valuable time back. And I think that was what I found the most useful thing from using Legatics and even other software that I used.
Gotcha. And Anthony, I mean, have you noticed, I mean, I presume you catch up with your clients every now and then to ask them how things are going. Do they ever give you any feedback on what they're doing with this additional time they have?
I think it is making the work more interesting. I remember, I feel kind of bad about it because my favorite demo of the software I ever gave was to a trainee who cried, and she just spent her weekend making a Bible at the end of a transaction, and we did it in a single click. And she just kind of, it was quite kind of emotional reactions. I was pleased that we solved the problem, but also quite sad that I'd made somebody upset. But I think it is making the work more interesting. As to whether you fill the time-saving gap with more work or not, I think Lucy's right. It does go to how you structure the firm, and I think there we have to think big. I think a lot of the work, certainly that's done outside of the US, is quite often on a capped fee basis, and quite often those fee caps are reached. And I think that actually means that the nature of the basis upon which we're delivering legal services has already changed. And then it's the internal accounting that perhaps hasn't caught up. And I think if law firms start to think more imaginatively on a bigger scale, which is probably a huge thing to change for law firms, and potentially quite scary, and could affect profitability in unpredictable ways in organizations that are already quite profitable. I think you can start to break that connection between 1 hour's work and 1 hour's pay, because I think once you've hit fixed fee arrangements, that's actually already broken.
And I'm glad you brought up the hour. I mean, it does seem that the hour is, we haven't really talked about this, and we could do a whole thing on it, but just very briefly, it does feel that the time-based legal economy, as I call it, that is actually central to a lot of this, that because there's onus on, well, we make money by selling time, fundamentally, it generates the stress, it generates the need to fill that time with any type of activity. I mean, is that, I mean, as Anthony alludes to, that if you move more towards capped and fixed fees, that it takes away a lot of that stress. I mean, Lucy, do you think there's truth in that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I find it really hard to understand why at this point, and I will probably get fired for, for this one, but when I was a junior lawyer, it started to not make sense to do hours-based charging. And, I've been here 20 years and we are still doing it. And I'm constantly surprised that that is still the model. But whenever it feels like it is so ingrained in law firm accounting that whenever you try to change it, because it fixed fees and capped fees, they're pretty much based on hourly rates. So you're still governed by this concept of charging for time, when in fact that's the opposite of what everyone wants to do. But it's so deeply ingrained in the way law firms operate, it just seems to be impossible to shift.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, we're coming towards the Q&A part, but let's do a couple of quick fires before we do Q&A, and perhaps these will be covered anyway, but let's ask them now. Just briefly, I mean, maybe this could be for each of you. I mean, what advice would you give to a junior lawyer as they approach, well, perhaps someone who's a law student or someone who's going to become a trainee? What kind of things would you tell them to think about as they're coming into these roles so that they can avoid some of these problems?
I mean, having been, I guess, the lawyer most recently, I think what helped me the most was not seeing the job as a text-based kind of job. Like, a lot of it is process, a lot of it is data. Ironically, I think one of the jobs that helped me the most was a very mundane one. I had to update a manual contract database and input the data into an online database, which seemed very pointless and boring at the time, but it taught me a lot about the value of data in a contract. So I think you're going to do some rough and somewhat boring work, but there is, to a degree, some silver lining in a lot of what you do, and you do pick up a lot of things in that work. So I think you're never going to be doing the cool stuff and the interesting stuff straight away, but try to find the silver lining in some of the more mundane stuff, and where possible, use as much technology to make your life easier.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, and can I guess law schools, I mean, that's where it all starts, isn't it? Can law schools play a part here? Can law schools, and perhaps Chrissie, perhaps close to some of the law schools now, I mean, can they do more to prepare, rather than just teaching the law or even just the business of law, but just say, look, let's be realistic. There's no point lying to you. We think joining a big law firm is fantastic, but you need to be aware of ABC. I mean, should they be doing more of that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's sort of quite a big gap between expectations versus reality, which happens when you come out of law school and into a training contract or into a junior lawyer role, because I think at law school, you're prepared for the content, the academic content of what the law is, and the LPC to a certain extent prepares you for a certain amount of kind of drafting and what the documents look like. But actually nothing really prepares you for the environment that you're in, sort of the pressure of those targets, working to, 6-minute units, having a certain financial target, what sort of day-to-day tasks you'll be doing, the kind of pressures you'll be under to sort of serve client demands, serve employer demands. Nothing really prepares you for that element of it. And I think law schools could do better. I mean, to a certain extent, you have to do your kind of 2-year training contract in order to qualify. But I think before you get to that stage, you should be better prepared for what the training contract involves. And I think law schools should be doing more to prepare you for that sort of environment, because a lot of the burnout is environmental as well as the environment that you're in, that high pressure scenario. And you're already under a huge amount of internal pressure to have succeeded and got through the very grueling process of qualifying as a solicitor. You're already in a somewhat fragile mental state, having sort of been battered the whole way through that process for many who have struggled. That when you get there and you're then kind of piled on with these targets and all this pressure, it can then sort of compound, which is why we're seeing so many junior lawyers in particular who are struggling with this process. So I think sort of more awareness around what it's like to work to a target, even if you could do a course which was kind of where you had to measure it to 6-minute units or something like that, would just better prepare you for working in that way and what that kind of pressure feels like. And I think if you could do that, you'd see there would be a lot less of a huge gap between expectation and reality.
Yeah, no, totally. We've got a question from Alex, who asks, and this is an interesting one. It flips the debate around, and they ask, actually, are some legal tech solutions contributing to stress and burnout? It's interesting, actually. I've heard this before, particularly for people who work in-house with very, very clunky CLM systems. So are some legal tech solutions, perhaps older or ones that aren't particularly good, actually making things worse for the young lawyers?
I think it's an important question, and I don't think it's just confined to old legal technology as well. I think we've got a transaction management platform. That platform's telling people exactly what they need to do next on the deal at various points in time. And I think we do have to be mindful that can increase people's stress if we've got a platform that's pinging people, if it's now more available outside of email or the times at which we're sending notifications to people about things they need to do next are perhaps late at night. I think we can do some thinking around, what time do we send notifications out? Do we have features that actually incorporate a better work-life balance or management of stress within the platform? So I think they're really, really pertinent issues, and I think something that we do have to think about as we design new legal technology as well.
I mean, I guess the key point is, if you get kind of like rammed into using this piece of software that, let's say, the partners aren't going to even look at, but you have to use it, and it's awful. It's an interesting thing, there's this thing about CLM and other legal tech implementation in-house, and some people were saying like 23% said it had contributed to them leaving their jobs, because just like having to work with this really clunky system, and they were doing a fairly repetitive job, as many lawyers do. In fact, not all lawyers do really exciting work. It had driven them out. And I just wondered, Lucy, obviously Pinson's has a lot of tech. Do you think there's a risk you could implement something and then go, whoops, we shouldn't have done
that? Yes, there's always a risk of that. And it's one that I think we mitigate by having lawyers like my team who really get legal tech, do a lot of work with lots of different systems, and can quite quickly look at what's going to work and what's going to be a struggle. I think the real challenge is, as you alluded to, a lot of the time in-house and in law firms, the people who are procuring the technology aren't the people who are going to use it. And that disconnect is really, really problematic, because where I have seen, and I work a lot with clients who are implementing tech solutions for their legal teams, where they go wrong are because they've been procured for a completely different part of the business, and it's like, oh yeah, but legal can have this as well because we've already bought it. And it wasn't designed for legal, it doesn't work for legal, and it makes everybody's lives miserable, but there's nothing that they can do about it, because they don't have any budget of their own, and they're stuck with this system. And the same thing happens in law firms. You've got people procuring stuff that the end users have never seen, and then they bring it in and they wonder why everyone hates it and nobody uses it. So there's a real lesson, I think, in that.
It's a good point, actually. I mean, I've seen literally hundreds of demos over the years, but it's true. I mean, it's how many junior associates are brought to the demo with the head of innovation and the partner in charge of our practice? So very few, I would imagine. Some firms do, I know for a fact, bring in the associates to see the demos. Another question which relates directly to technology, and the question again is slightly different, which is, are some of the high costs, and to presume that it's a high cost, of upgrading systems actually a factor to not go ahead? I.e., to put it simply, does the cost of legal tech, even though it's great to talk about how tech is going to solve things, certainly for the smaller firms, I would have thought, does the cost of the systems actually prevent this from happening? That you might have a law firm that would really love to make life easier for the junior associates, but they're just like, we're not paying 50,000 a year for this thing, which helps one part of one stage of one practice group. We're just not going to do it. I mean, is cost an issue? I think this has to go into legatics again.
Yeah, sure. So we pitch the cost angle on an efficiency gain. So we've got a lot of data now to show that bringing in legatics is a cost reduction. We also a new system. So quite often law firms won't have any technology in this space because legal transaction management is newer as a technology concept. So it's not quite the same as upgrading your document management system, where you're replacing a piece of technology and you've got a lot of transition costs as well. So we don't experience it quite in that way. I think the other thing that's changing with technology is, as more of it goes online, as more of it's delivered within a web browser, you're shifting the upgrading, the maintenance, the deployment of that technology from law firms to the providers themselves. So this idea that your firm has adopted a document management system that is locally installed and it is really hard to update and improve, I think is changing. And you see that even with document management systems that are moving more onto the cloud, as more and more technology is in the hands of the people making it and the people, and they're much more able to give regular updates to it. That phenomenon of technology that's sort of getting stuck on a certain version in a law firm should be further and further away. So I think the more people can do to adopt cloud-based technology there, the less in the future they will get stuck with outdated technology.
No, totally. Actually, one thing I remember one tech founder telling me was that he'd just come out of a meeting with a law firm and he was quite frustrated because he told them what the license was. It was $20,000 or something. And the law firm had said, hey, we could hire like a paralegal for that, and frankly, we'd rather have a body who can fee earn than use your software. And he tried to explain to them that in the long run, the efficiency gains, all these other benefits would far outweigh just adding another person to the team. To which the law firm went, nah, no. At the end of the day, money's money. This person will earn money. That's the end of the story. Goodbye. I mean, Lucy, do you think that it's not just, whether tech works or not works, it's about the broader understanding of how tech actually can benefit the whole business?
Yes, and I think that's where law firms probably have some catching up to do, because you can see that the ones who are really at the forefront of all of this are data-led, and they understand the implications of data. And when they're talking about technology, it's not just about efficiency gains and being able to reduce headcount. It's actually that if you can really move to a digital first organization, that has enormous benefits well beyond, oh yes, but we can, cut 20 lawyers and replace them with this piece of tech. The good firms get that and are moving towards it. I think there will be firms that will never get it, and I suspect that they will have a relatively short life when we get to a certain point. But the conversation should never be about the cost of headcount versus the cost of a piece of tech, because if the tech is doing its job properly, it will give you so much more than just adding some bodies in one particular team.
And I guess another key point, and you've all mentioned this in different ways, is that it will keep talent in the firm. That someone who might end up, like Chrissie, who probably would have been a great asset to Owen Mitchell, has now left. If tech had been able to keep you there, I imagine you would have stayed and progressed.
Yeah, I think tech was a huge barrier for me, just in terms of efficiency, and very similar things to have been said before about kind of technology being designed. I worked in quite a niche team. I worked in the international team, and our kind of central case management system just didn't really work for our team because we structured litigation a completely different way in different jurisdictions in different countries, and you don't follow the same procedure. So it was incredibly frustrating for things to be taking a lot longer than I knew that they could. And also kind of through my side ventures, I knew a lot about tech and I knew what technology was available. And I think that added to my frustration, which perhaps it might not have done for other people. But I think because other people just kind of accepted the process, whereas I just said, I know this process can be done better and I could actually spend more of my time doing more engaging work. And I think that was, as mine was more nature of the work than sort of number of hours focused. For me, I was very focused around, making those hours as enjoyable as possible by doing engaging work. And I didn't mind doing the same hours, but I wanted those hours to be enjoyable and productive.
No, it makes sense. Well, let's just do a slightly left field thing, and then I guess we'll move towards the conclusion. And that's working from home, which obviously has become so dominant in all of our lives now. Does working from home actually help on the stress and burnout issue? Putting tech to one side briefly, does working from home help? I mean, common sense says if you're working from home, you should be less stressed, it should be better. But is that always the case?
I don't mind jumping back in on that one quickly. I mean, I think there's a difference between working from home and working remotely. I think actually having the ability to work from different locations can help. I think being at home constantly can often lead to burnout for different ways. I think being in your home environment, and I think people, when we were at work, we called it living from work rather than working from home, because of the element of the work now invading your personal space, which it never used to. And I think that can lead to its own burnout, and not having a kind of end point to your day. It just kind of bleeds into your evening and you just move from the dining table into the lounge rather than having that cutoff point. And a lot of us actually worked a lot more hours when we were working from home as well, because we didn't have that natural cutoff point. So I think in some ways it can lead to more burnout. But I think if you're able to kind of mix up your location a little bit, that can sometimes help. And again, everyone's different. Some people have lovely offices at home, and perhaps it's easier for people who do have a better setup at home. But I think the ability to work from different locations and perhaps, go co-working spaces or something like that, I think that can certainly ease those tensions.
Absolutely. Lucy, I remember actually on the previous call, you did mention something about, doing work from different places. On balance, is working from home helping or not?
I think it's too early to say. I think it's had benefits in, reducing commuting time and giving people, I think, more flexibility through their day. If you want to go and do an exercise class at lunchtime and you're at home, it's a lot easier than if you're in the office. But as Chrissie said, you have that sort of feeling of being constantly switched on, and taking your work with you everywhere you go. I think we're in the sort of early stages really of seeing how that works. I definitely agree that the ability to work in different places, not necessarily from one room in your house or two rooms in your house, I think that helps people just feel that they've got more control and more variety. For me, I love going back into the office because I like seeing people, and I like the structure that it gives to my day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember when I used to talk about, being, people who are introverts and people who like working from home. And then you get lots of people jumping on social media going, oh, but I hate working from home. I'd love to be in the office. I'm energized by other people. So I guess it kind of underlines the point about you've got different personality types. The idea that all lawyers are like the same personality and they all like to do things the same way is just not true. And I guess that adds to the complexity of the situation. So we're coming towards the end, and one of the questions is actually mentioned the billable hour, and that tech isn't a magic pill, which I think we'd all agree with. and it's about behavior and culture, which is kind of where we were going to end up anyway. So just to wrap up, let's just go around the panel and just have a quick think. I mean, what kind of key takeaways would you give to any people who work at law firms, particularly if there's any senior people, partners or HR people who are listening, or people in-house, what they can do to improve their culture and their environment so we don't get so much stress and so much burnout? Let's start with Chrissie and we'll work our way back around. Chrissie, I mean, what kind of cultural, environmental takeaways would you suggest?
I think it sounds basic, but actually talking to your staff and listening to what they want rather than sort of applying a one-size-fits-all approach, particularly when it comes to mental health and burnout, having sort of a mental health policy for this, this is what we do for all of our staff, I think actually doesn't work for everyone. And actually just having a conversation, talking to your staff about what they're experiencing, what their individual needs are, and as far as possible, trying to accommodate those. So creating flexibility and really a culture where you have an open door and you can come and say, actually, my mental health needs don't quite fit the mold that you have, but this is what would help me, I think can really help. So being kind of proactive again, and really making sure that you have a culture where people can speak freely and don't necessarily have to fit into a kind of pre-designed mold.
Fantastic. Ryan, what takeaways would you suggest that law firms think about?
I think one of the ones is artificial or fake deadlines. I think you quite often as a junior get given something, you get told, turn it around tonight, and then nothing happens on it for a week or 2 weeks. And then the next thing happens and that just keeps happening and you sort of start getting jaded as a result. So I think it kind of falls to the senior associates, the partners, to set clear and reasonable expectations and to play that role on pushing back on clients sometimes because the junior just isn't in a position to do it. And then I guess also on the senior associate side and partner side to say, just because you went through the ringer and did all these things, that they don't necessarily have to do it again. It's kind of up to you to break the wheel a little bit. And so it is in your hands.
Good point. Good point. Anthony, what would you say?
I think role modeling is really key here. So if you can write what you like in a document, you can tell people to use legal technology, you can tell people to have conversations about mental health, but what you do yourself as a senior person within a law firm is absolutely key. So if you're using legal technology yourself, then your juniors will expect that to be a way in which they should behave. If you're showing that you leave the office at certain times to fit around other things in your life, then other people will feel more empowered to do the same. And if you start the conversation around mental health, if you talk about your own mental health, if you ask people about their mental health and show an interest in that amongst your team, then I think you can really lead by example, and the culture will then be what you make it, and as a result of how you act.
Fantastic. And Lucy, your views, and also just to wrap up, because we're at the end now, if you could just maybe mention again the work that you're doing with your organization, because I think that'd be very useful for everyone.
Sure. I mean, following on from what Anthony said, I think decide what kind of firm you want to be and be it. Every single partner and manager in the business has the ability to influence what we do and how we present. For us, it's purpose. We know exactly what kind of firm we want to be, and that does influence our behaviours, and the Mindful Business Charter, and all of that makes a really clear statement about where we are on this stuff and how we treat people. There will always be law firms where it's big, clever, fun to dump on people on a Friday night, and those firms, as long as they're very open with people about this is the experience you are going to have if you work here, that is a choice that you make, that's probably fine. And I think it's incumbent on people who don't want to work in that situation and don't want to be that kind of law firm to state that really, really clearly and say, this is what we're doing. So for us, Mindful Business Charter has been huge in that, it sets out very clearly, these are the principles that we adhere to protect people's well-being. And I think the links have been published, but please do go and have a look at it because it's really useful. Even if your organisation isn't signed up, just looking at the principles, there will be things that you can take away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. And I think we will be sharing the link as well to the organization. Actually, if we just go to the very final slide, which gives a bit of information about how you can reach, there we go. There's it's just in the chat function. If you want to have a look, attendees, to the Pinson Masons case studies, mindfulness business charter there. Basically, let's all just wrap up now. So thank you very, very, very much. It's been really fantastic, really interesting conversation and discussion. Thank you for all your questions. Obviously, this really is not the end of the journey here. This is really just the beginning, and hopefully this is just one of many, many more discussions we'll be having across the profession about these issues. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to our panel. Goodbye.